I am finally back. It's been a long time since I did a book review. I mentioned in the last one that I did, I think about probably 2 months ago or so, that I was planning to read Uncle Tom's Cabin and that I was part of the way through it. This is what I would call my first book fail out of the year. In that, sorry if my dogs are barking in the background. I intended to read it all, but it is a very difficult book to read, very much more difficult than I anticipated. So it took a very long time to finish reading it, and I actually didn't read it. I got through about halfway, and then it just came to a point it was so difficult to understand. I was having to reread things like 3 or 4 times because it's a book based off of, that's what I need. It was a book based in the 1800s about slavery, and the author is very good at using the dialogue of that time, but in doing that, it kind of had me a little bit lost in how to understand what the heck was going on, because it's really a whole different language, honestly. So I ended up spark noting it, which I hate doing, and I highly discourage it if you can help it. But it was to a point I wanted to understand the book, and I really couldn't comprehend what was going on. So I spark noted it, but I did enjoy it, and I did have a good understanding of most of it. It's a pretty old book, and it's a very well-known classic, so most of you probably already know what it is. I'm kind of surprised my dogs aren't still barking, which is kind of weird. So it's very famous because it was monumental in kind of exposing slavery and, well, you know what I mean. Just all of the effects it has on both sides, and highly discouraging it and explaining why it's a human's rights violation, even if you're looking at it from a lot of different angles, because it had a lot of different characters in it that I'm gonna put these in here. It had a lot of different characters from all sorts of different opinions, because there were people in it that were slaves, there were people that were not slaves, there were people that supported slavery, there were people who didn't, obviously. And it was very interesting, and there were multiple places. I need the pickaxes. Grab the pickaxes. There was a lot of different stories going on at the same time, which was also a very interesting thing to comprehend. It was mainly focused on, obviously, Tom, who's Uncle Tom, and there was another family that was heavily featured where it was a mother and her child and then her husband, but they were from separate plantations, and she was running away from her owner because he was planning to sell her son. Her son was like, I think about like 3 years old. He was like a toddler, and or a little older than that. So she was running away because he had planned to sell them. Yes, I'm aware how slow this card is for those watching my gameplay. We're working on fixing it. But she ran away, and the man playing Tom, Uncle Tom, he stays behind and accepts his fate that he's been sold by his master. And it's very interesting because there's a lot of Christian themes in the book, because everyone on that first plantation where Uncle Tom and Eliza, the woman and her son, live, they grew up very religious. The slave owner's wife is a devout Christian, and she teaches them all Christianity. And it's very interesting to see them hold on to that faith in spite of being literally slaves and sold in slavery. 1 second. Shush. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. But yeah, it's just very interesting because they all grow up Christian in that specific plantation. And then it also goes to other plantations because in this one they're treated very well, but the author argues through different characters' opinions that in spite of being treated well, they still don't have the people who are slaves' best interest at hand, because in spite of taking care of them, they're still not giving them freedom, which at the end of the day is every human's main interest, is having freedom. So, which is why Eliza and her son run away. So that idea was, I would say, very well portrayed. And then they go into other, it starts out very soft and like, oh, these owners care about their slaves, they've taken care of them, they've taught them about Christianity because that is a very important value to them. They kind of see them as slightly equal humans, but they still treat them a little bit less than. And then it goes into other plantations where like there's a woman who's a severe alcoholic, and she tells her story of how she was turned into a baby maker and she had multiple children, and then she was sold with her children to someone else, and the second slave owner sold her children and then sold her to a different person. And then what? Someone was slacking here. And then that one she had a child by, and she ended up killing the child because she was afraid that it was just going to be taken away from her again, and that it would have to endure all sorts of other issues that she'd had to deal with. You know, she couldn't bear the loss of another child. And so she turned to alcohol to kind of, you know, relieve her pain. And there's other people who, they go to a slave trade because Tom's second owner, when he sold to an owner. And when that owner dies, he's put back onto the market, essentially. And his next owner is a very mean man. I didn't bring any torches. I'm a genius. But he's a very mean man. And when he is bought, the owner also buys a 15-year-old girl with the intent of basically making her a sex slave. And she's replacing his old sex slave, who I guess she was aging or something. I don't really know for sure what happened. I don't recall them talking about it a lot. But again, I didn't read everything. Oh, I thought I saw an Enderman. But it was still just very interesting because it starts out very kind of gentle. So it kind of seems like, oh, well, they weren't all that bad. And they at least treat them well. So, but it goes into why that's still not okay. And then it goes into the more vile side of slavery and like the more realistic, I would say, aspect of it. Where even if you're not, like, it just shows no matter what side of it you're on, it's still wrong to have slavery and support slavery, or to even just like allow it around you. For example, the girl who became an alcoholic due to the loss of her children and just trying to cope with that, we find out a couple of chapters later, I believe, or like the next chapter, we find out that she actually was whipped to death by her owner. And Tom's owner, the wife, basically says, well, aren't there like laws we can use to protect this and stuff or anything? And the husband basically just says, you know, it's better to just turn your eyes away and pretend like it's not happening. And the author goes into why like that's not the best way to go about that, and how it's not really helping anyone, which I thought she did very well with. But it was overall a very interesting book. I would encourage everyone to try and read it if they can. At the very least, I would read... Oh, nope. Go away, sir. We're playing Ring Around the Rosie. I would encourage everyone to read like the first 2 or 3 chapters at the least, because they're not terribly hard to read, and it takes long. It takes longer than normal, but it's still very interesting to read, and it really kind of opens your eyes to a different perspective on how things were for people. So I really encourage people to read that if they can, because it really opened my eyes to a lot of like prejudice that I didn't really understand, and it just really depicted it very well, especially in the opening scene, because the opening scene starts with the first owner and the second owner conversing about how they treat their slaves, and it's just very crazy to hear the way that the second owner talks about people, saying things like, oh, well, the women get sensitive when you take their kids away, so I always just send them on a nice long trip, and when they come back their kids are gone and they just kind of get over it. And it was just like so strange to actually see someone saying that, even though it's a fictional character, obviously, but it's still very moving to know like that really did happen to people. It wasn't something completely fictitious. Like, all of these stories did happen in some way or form, even if it wasn't these specific characters that experienced it. So I definitely encourage people to read it. I would give it a rating. I don't think I will rate this one, just because I didn't truly read it all the way. I read the beginning, I read up to like half of it, and I tried to read like the last chapter after I did the Spark Notes. But I don't feel like I have enough of the full depth of the book to really be able to give it a fair rating. So I'm not going to rate it. I'm just going to say it's very good. It's very mind pricking. It makes you think about a lot of things. So try and open your mind and give it a little read here or there if you can. And I think I'll end the stream right there. Bye.